if the series is about Doctor Who, we felt that everything should either, that the whole story should either be Doctor Who or should revolve around Doctor Who. He should be part of it. And this was one of the things that we had in mind, and we found with writing for you that we could do this, that anything that we gave you to do or to say, you could cope with, which is a joy for writers.
Well, it's very nice of you. And the other thing I have to say I'm terribly grateful for is what you just said about the programme being called Doctor Who and the role of the Doctor within that, because it must be terribly tempting for writers to, in a sense, turn their back on the regular character, because that's all been done by somebody else.
That's right.
And they invent new characters and want to write stories about those new characters, because to them they're more interesting because it's their creation. And I have done Doctor Who's, I will name no names, where when a series was re-edited, it was originally shown in 2 episodes. People are going to be guessing here, aren't they? We're showing 2 episodes and re-edited into 4 to be shown on television. And in the first of those 4 episodes, my character hardly appeared at all.
I know the one you mean.
You
we
do,
watched
yes.
it. Pip actually timed the amount of time you had on the
Yes.
on the box. It is quite true.
And the viewers wanted to see me, didn't they?
Yes.
Well, they want to see the thing. I mean, if you had a Lovejoy, and Lovejoy was hardly in it, it's only one fly, you know. It's one fly, and I think it's. If you believe in reincarnation,
it's the Rani. That's what I'm going to say. It's the Rani.
If you believe in reincarnation, it's probably some actor who's passed on who had a duff part in one of your films.
We don't write duff parts.
Very true.
No, but no. Well, with that, you see, with the Rani, we could have been carried away, but the Rani actually helped to illustrate the Doctor's character, because she was another mind that was sort of equal to yours, and therefore it gave us an opportunity really to show 2 brilliant minds working against and talking with each other, which was a joy for us actually.
It's much more interesting television. I know what you were saying earlier about constantly underestimating the ability of the viewers to understand things. And all the best programmes that I've ever seen on television, and other people agree, irrespective of what they might consider their minds to be, are the ones that challenge you, to make you go away thinking about it afterwards. Writers like the chap who wrote The Organisation, Philip Mackey. Yeah. Philip Mackey used to write that kind of stuff that you're actually not sure what it's about until you got to about episode 3. But I find that a hook. I think Anthony Ainley found it a problem, didn't he? Because
but he's always had a slight chip on his shoulder about that for some reason.
I think I would if I was playing the Master and I saw myself as the ruler of the universe, the evil genius. And this bird came and usurped my role, because she was basically a female, a time lady, wasn't she?
She was. Yeah.
She
that
was.
was what
That
John
was the
asked
brief.
us to create.
Yes.
A time lady.
Yes,
I think in a way you didn't need the Master as well. Do you agree or not?
Well, I think John's idea was it would be interesting to see them together.
The Vervoid story, which was episodes.
Yeah,
which
but
one?
that did show the contradiction.
No, but that was what I was going to say is that was a sort of a cliffhanger, in that nobody knew. Do you remember, Colin? Nobody knew who was going to.
But it also shows that the Vervoid is a nice contrast. We were originally invited to do the Rani because you had more filming than you normally have on Doctor Who, certainly in those days. Mm-hmm. And what had happened was that the previous producer of Doctor Who had a script of ours, a film script that we'd written for the BBC, that he'd been script editor on in the office that John took over. John, in some spare moment, he'd gone, read the script, and decided he needed film writers for this, so he got in touch with us for the Mark of the Rani. The second story, when he got in touch with us, because we'd been in Spain for 2 months, and we bumped into him in a lift, he wanted an all-studio piece because he'd run out of filming, and asked us to do an Agatha Christie sort of country house type mystery, which, if you remember, the whole of it was set on a spaceship. We didn't have a day's location.
Which is the sci-fi equivalent of a country house.
Well, that's what we did. We gathered. We took
much better, actually.
We took a spaceship on a long journey. We had the usual group of characters, and you had to discover which one was the murderer, and they all had motives behaving strangely.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that was the second one we did for you, wasn't it? Then we had the emergency, the one that we had to do because of episode 14 of the Trial of a Time Lord,
which you wrote in.
Well, we wrote that in 2 days, actually.
And Are you related to any wires at all?
I hope not.
And the final one that we did with you in mind, if you remember. But then you didn't do the first 4 of the batch. It was the first 4 of
Time
the
and
new
Roll.
dog.
You always manage to bring that up, don't you?
Well, we were so disappointed that you wouldn't do it. Well, you couldn't do it.
At
but
the,
you were
at,
busy.
at, at the time of the
Thank you.
commissioning, you were, as far as we were concerned, we knew you were going to be the doctor. But by the time we finished it, you were no longer going to be the doctor. And I don't think the new doctor had been appointed before we'd finished the scripts. Do you, Jane? I seem to think we'd finished them.
No, we were hoping that Colin could be talked into doing it, but he
Nobody
wasn't.
attempted
But what
to.
I was going to say about the Vervoid was that was one that you were kept waiting to the end to know who had actually was actually behind it. And I remember it was Chris Clough, wasn't it, who directed? Was it Chris Clough?
Yes,
Well,
Chris Clough.
Chris
was the
Clough.
Yes, it was.
And he was saying that in the offices, as the scripts came in, they were taking bets on who actually was going to be
Who done it?
who had done it. Yes.
Always a sign of a good script, isn't it?
Well, we were
interested enough
pleased
to-
because it meant, as far as writers were concerned, it meant that we were giving red herrings. We weren't cheating, but it meant that the script really was working as far as who done it was concerned, which isn't always the case.
As far as we were concerned, at that time we were finished with it. We delivered our Vervoid story,
That
and it was just coming up to going into production eventually.
Well,
And
after
we
the
were
Vervoid
finished.
story, there were 2 stories which finished off the trial. I mean, they were really the ones.
Well, you had 3, didn't you?
There were 3 stories.
Four parters. 2 were the prosecution case against you,
Yeah.
and ours was to be your defence.
Yes.
Of course.
Which of course, yes, which you got all wrong because they managed to twist it around and turn it into.
Yes, well, we did that deliberately because we didn't
course you did.
really feel that way about it.
We love him, really, you know.
What was it called? Genocide. That's right.
That's
for
right,
charge of genocide. No, what happened was we got 2 final scripts, and then there was this very strange day when we were told we weren't doing episode 14 because episode 13 had been written largely by
Had been written completely by Robert Holmes.
By Robert Holmes,
Yes.
who very sadly, and a great loss to us all, died before he could complete number 14.
He'd written 12 pages, I think, at 14
Yeah.
when he died.
And Eric Saywood, who was a script editor then, took on the job of rewriting it, and he gave himself a difficult task really because he was personally very involved with Robert Holmes, and I think it was a very difficult thing for him to do, to write that last episode. And he wrote it with an end which John Nathan Turner didn't like, and asked him if he could modify it. And Eric refused. He said, "That is my script, take it or leave it," as we were told at the time. So within 2 or 3 days, an alternative script had to be found. And as I understand it, of course, you couldn't be allowed to see or know any detail of episode 14.
No.
Well,
Because
Jane,
otherwise there'd be a kind of hint of plagiarism there.
we got a phone call. You took the phone call, didn't you?
Yes, we had a phone call from John, and instead of ringing up to tell me some nice little juicy bit of gossip, he said, "I'm putting episode 13 in a taxi. It'll be arriving at your house. Will
No,
you
he didn't
ring?"
tell you what it was. He said he's putting the script
Did he?
in the taxi. He didn't actually tell you what it was because paranoia set in as far as we were concerned. But carry on.
Oh yes, that's right, because we thought it was something wrong with one of ours. But anyway, and he said, he's putting it, would we ring it, would we read it, and then go in the morning to a meeting with him. He didn't say why, so we read it, episode 13
The
this
taxi
is.
turned up with it.
Yes,
And it
we
was a
read
Bob
it.
Holmes. We
It's the
thought,
Bob Holmes script,
the
yeah.
point I was making about paranoia, we thought that somebody had been, script editors have got a tendency to do this, had decided to rewrite your script without consulting you, which they can't do contractually. So we thought, oh, what's happening? Because John wasn't the John we knew. He was uptight, quiet, reserved, and wouldn't commit himself, just said, well, will you read the script and come in? Which was unlike the relationship we'd had with John. Because we were relieved because what we got was episode 13, which we had no idea, you see, but going back a little bit, when they were commissioning writers to do the first 3 stories, 3 stories
First
or
2
4.
stories.
No, the first 3 stories. they
We wrote
asked
the
us to drop.
third one.
Yes, well, writers, we're writers, darling.
Oh yes, that's true. That's true.
We have been for quite a while, and I won't say how long.
Yes, go
But
on.
anyway, they asked us to drop things in because they had that dreadful trial. You've seen, they were like the jury for European Song Contest sitting there. Well, we were all asked to drop things in, but we were never given an explanation. We were never told what the end of it was going to be. What
No.
we didn't know, we really didn't know
No.
the outcome of the trial. So we get 13, and 13 still doesn't make clear what the outcome of the trial is
Yeah.
going to be. So we turn up at John's office, and instead of the coffee pot being put on and Jane and John settling down to a nice old gossip about what goes on in the BBC and wider, there was a lady in there who was introduced as a lawyer, and she was going to act as a legal witness. And it turns out John, because Eric hadn't signed his contract, so they had no rights in the script, the BBC. Eric hadn't signed his contract, so he was able to withdraw the script. You were in production on the Monday. This was 3 days away. And they had no script. Could we come up with a story? So we began to cross-examine John. And the reason for the witness was that John was unable to tell us anything about the end of the story, and certainly nothing about what was in script 14. So otherwise the plagiarism or breach of copyright could have come into it. And we actually went across and had some sandwiches in Eric Sable's old office and came up with some ideas. I think one of the ideas was yours, wasn't it? That was the trial within a trial.
Yes, that's
You
it.
know, the episode where there's a phony trial, where
Yes.
it's being created,
Yes.
where Bonnie is saying something
That's right.
and it isn't, and you recognise that it's all a mirage, it isn't
Yeah.
Bonnie. And the other thing that I was able to come up with was, this was just personal, we could blow up that damn screen.
Yes.
And we went away. John bought that and bought one or two other ideas, and we went away, and then we worked 14, 16 hours a day for 2 days, and we came up with a script that was, 38 minutes long for
Yeah.
a 25-minute episode,
Yeah.
if you
See,
remember.
normally you're so used to writing that you automatically know when the script is the right length. In any case, we read it through to time it, but we didn't have time to do that, and so it was too long.
We didn't even have time to go and say visit the locations. All that happened was that John rang another office, and somebody from that office would bring in drawings or sketches and say, well, this is which if you remember, we did it in that pottery museum,
Yep.
that final episode. So we hadn't even seen that. We just had we had some photographs and things. So to dream up and get the atmosphere and the ambience of that place, simply had to come off of that.
It got into wonderful areas that I love in Doctor Who, and it's happened very rarely actually. Are you familiar with a series called Sapphire and Steel? Years
Remember
ago.
it vaguely, yeah.
Sapphire and Steel, which dealt in kind of reality and fantasy and layers of reality and went off into very bizarre directions. And I loved it as a series, and this episode did that. Is this really happening?
Well, the Dickensian bit, for instance, the atmosphere
Yes.
was. In fact, I think in the script 13, Bob Holmes' home script said he wanted a Dickensian feel about it, because if you remember the fellow that Jeff Hughes plays, Mr. Popplewick, he was a Dickensian character,
Yes.
wasn't he?
Yes.
So that is where we got the Tale of Two Cities bit out of.
course.
So yes, I thought we were able to freewheel and able to, and in fact the committee never came to play, did it? There was no time for the usual
Yes.
committee of, usually when you submit a script, it goes through producer, director, head of department, all the rest of it, and they all feel perhaps they ought to contribute, and not always are those contributions constructive.
Well, the end result is usually a dilution, isn't it?
Yes,
it
it
begins
is.
to lose its voice.
Yeah, and you'd never have got, I'm sure you'd never have got away with all those lovely things that we filmed down at Camber Sands, there with the Valiar being all over
Oh,
the
yeah,
place
that's
and,
it, yeah.
and going into the quicksand and
Yeah.
coming back out
Yeah.
again, and all they'd have said, no, that's too,
Yeah.
I'm sure they'd have said that was all
Yeah.
far too
Yes, they would.
tricksy.
Yes, they would.
And
Actually-
yet it's the stuff that I think is what made that last episode, it was
So
Well, it
it's so
it
exciting
kept
to
its
do.
energy, didn't it?
Yes.
The whole, and everybody, we got a good atmosphere. Do you remember? I think of all the Doctor Who's we did, that particular, or the two episodes together really, but that particular sequence, I think everybody was in far better spirits, or good spirits, and pulling together.
It's the Blitz mentality,
yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's because it was done, at the last minute under great pressure, And in those circumstances, people always do seem to turn up trumps.
The only two that were a little bit out of sorts was Tony Selby and Ant, because when we had 35, we had to cut 5 or 6 minutes in rehearsal. Remember when we first rehearsed it, it came to 38, and the only cuts we could make were then, because you were going off on location next time. We took out 6, and it was all their stuff, because their stuff was basically character and business. It was unfortunate because it was quite amusing and interesting, but we were at the end of a 14-part story where the ends had to be wrapped up. So it was, to a certain extent, had to be plot driven, and we couldn't lose the bits of the plot that were going to give the explanation, such as it was, to the audience. So theirs came out, and it took them 2 or 3 days to get over it because they felt they were being shortchanged. But by the time we got up to, we were all right down. That carried on when we were down on the sands. But by the time we got up to the potteries, I think everybody was pulling together, because I can remember those long after the shooting. We used to shoot at night, sitting up at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning in the hotel lounge, with Michael doing his Ralph Richardson impersonations and you doing yours.
Yes.
And going on.
My Colin Baker impersonations.
No, I won't mention the ones you impersonate because they're still alive.
But in actual fact, we really enjoyed episode 14, didn't we?
I suppose we enjoyed that more than any other. We enjoyed all of them, but I think that one was more enjoyable.
I have 2 very strong memories of Camber Sands. One was the sound man, who endeared himself to all of us, because the quicksand bit was done with a pit of water.
That's right.
On which the fuller's earth and cork and stuff was on the top to look like sand, so it was basically water. He fell into it twice, the sound man, because it was so good and well camouflaged, and we were all delighted because on 2 occasions he'd legged it first off to the catering wagon and eaten all the lobster. Because in the salad there were little bits of lobster, and he ate the whole lot, and we loathed him, and he fell into the water twice. The other thing I remember is being done for speeding on the way home from Camber Sands.
I can remember.
That's right, you were.
Yeah.
I remember that. You were just ahead of us too, and you getting caught.
And you drove past.
You had a rough time, didn't you, really? You were on a pole here,
Yes.
and you were on that pole for an hour and a half, I should think. Easily. And I can remember you going into that because you had to have your nostrils and your ears plugged up with cotton wool, because as you went down, you were really immersed. There was no trickery about it, was it? You actually went below the surface in all that damn murk.
Except they weren't Colin's legs.
Oh no.
The legs that were kicking were not yours.
No, and that was purely because they were drying me out to redo it, and they bunged somebody else into my wet trousers to carry on doing the.
What did you think of that? I mean, did you?
I thought it was very clever.
No, did you think the legs matched yours?
Well, I thought they lacked a certain kind of vitality, which only comes from star status. Love it.
No trouble with equity.
None at all.
But actually, we
had to film that in reverse, didn't we?
Yes, that's
right.
Because I had to come out looking dry.
In all honesty, looking at it, I don't think that technically worked as well as it should have done. I think we didn't have the time to get it right.
No.
If you look at it again, it doesn't look quite right, does it?
Well, it's
passable, but it...
And I tried to learn the line phonetically backwards, because I had to say which came out as I don't know what it was now.
No, I don't remember what it was. No, I don't remember what it was. But we've enjoyed writing Doctor Who. I'm sure you enjoyed playing.
And where did you get the spurious catharsis? No, what is it? The catharsis of spurious.
Now, if you don't know it any longer, then you can't quote it.
A catharsis of spurious morality.
I understood it perfectly, but fans keep coming up to me and asking what it means, and I find that only someone with your brain power could actually explain it to me. Could you explain it?
Well, I'm not so sure you'll understand it if we do.